Peace has cost you your strength. Victory has defeated you. Darkness is your ally. You merely adopted the dark. I was born in it, molded by it. I didn't see the light until I was already a man. By then it was nothing to me but blinding.
This is the Boer Republic podcast.
Welcome to the Boer Republic podcast. Tonight, we've got a very special guest. Willem Petzer is joining us to discuss the issues that we face in South Africa today. We'll be talking about a variety of topics, but before we get to that, thanks for joining us, Willem.
The pleasure is all mine.
You've become quite a symbol for those Afrikaners and for those Boers who want to talk about what goes on in South Africa. And I think for those audience members who might not know much about your work, could you just please tell us a bit more about yourself and your work regarding spreading awareness of what's going on in South Africa?
Yeah, of course. I've been busy for about 2 months now, and I've started making videos on YouTube to basically tell the story of what's happening here, and also to give my opinion and give my opinion on stuff and talk about actual things happening here in South Africa. And I've been a lot more popular than I even thought I would be. I gained about 9,000 followers here on YouTube in the last 2 months, and I'm growing steadily. So I'm very happy about that.
That's actually quite good to know that there's reception for something like this. Not only on a national level, but an international level. And what's the reception been like in South Africa regarding your work? Has there been lots of resistance? Have you been met with a lot of issues regarding talking about South Africa?
No, not at all. I don't think I'm big enough yet to be attacked from the left. I think they'll probably start attacking me once I gain a significant audience. But after that, then I'll probably be attacked a lot more. But at this stage where I am right now, I've only received a lot of positive comments from people telling me to go on and telling me they're very happy and are very thankful for what I'm doing. So that's very good. Of course, I get all my death threats and threats of raping my family and stuff from Black Twitter, but I've got those before I even started making videos, so I don't really pay much attention to that.
Well, talking about attack, we saw that you showed on Twitter that you were attacked. There was an attempted robbery on your house. We just want to maybe hear about that, see if everything went okay and that you've recovered if anything was stolen.
Oh, no, nothing was stolen. I'm quite good after that. Luckily, I could prevent anything from happening there and, sort of fight them off with my intimidation and my pepper spray and stuff.
I think it was much more than pepper spray. But most likely it was more your intimidation.
I'm glad they didn't record me on their phones while they were attacking me, because then otherwise I might have gone to jail for, criminal injury, for impairing their dignity, because if you insult someone here in South Africa, it's considered a criminal offense for which you get 3 years in jail.
Well, I'm sure somewhere on on a server somewhere in the NSA, in the Google server somewhere, there lies that recorded message as cell phones pick up everything. But yeah, let's hope that stays hidden forever. I'm sure you read them their rights before you sprayed them in the face. But just from our side, we want to say we're very glad that you're okay. And I think what it did, it just brought some attention on especially gun laws, which we'll get later on, and the importance of protecting yourself and your family, and that especially if you stand up to these type of issues, safety is a big concern.
Of course, I look forward to talking about guns. It's a topic I quite enjoy talking about. So yeah.
Speaking of hate speech and the impairing of people's dignity with words, what's your definition of hate speech?
Well, I don't believe in any form of hate speech. I think free speech should be free. If a black guy wants to call me whatever he wants to call me, then I have no problem with that. And I also don't think anyone should ever be punished for calling a black guy whatever he wants to call a black guy. And it's not just over racial lines, over sexual orientation, gender, it doesn't matter. People may think that you're an asshole or whatever, but that's basically the worst punishment on this world that is fair for speech.
Well, at least us over here at Boer Republic identify as Rooikat attack helicopters. So luckily we won't get offended too easily. And where that's concerned is in terms of the hate speech and so on and what's happened with the Vicky Momberg case. What's your opinion of the outcome of that situation? And would we be seeing any more of that in South Africa?
I think it's completely ridiculous what happened with Vicky Momberg. It's just going against anything that is freedom in this country and in this world. It has just proven to us that there is no such thing as freedom in South Africa. And the precedent has been set. The next person who does the same thing will probably go to jail as well. I mean, they have to, otherwise it's unfair. So I don't know if you guys know much about law, but if the president has been set for it, then it's going to happen. I'm not sure what's going to happen to that Indian woman though that said that exact same phrase on the aeroplane. But I think she'll probably get it a lot lighter because she's not white, and racism these days are not about hating other races. It's about being superior to other races, and they can always throw that argument in that Indians aren't that much, privileged like white people are. So she won't get such a big punishment as Vicky Momberg got.
Yeah, I think here at the Boer Republic, we definitely, and I must say it's refreshing to hear someone with the same type of view on hate speech as we have. We definitely also think that hate speech is it's a type of an oxymoron in a way. I don't see how you can put an emotion to speech at all. And I feel the same way. Anyone, even if it's a death threat, even if it's a call to arms, we're not at the point where speech, which is just a disturbance of some wavelengths, where that should not be, that can't cause physical harm, unless if you're, Maria Sharapova screaming at decibels above 90 at Wimbledon.
Well,
but otherwise, there's
some forms of speech must be punished. You can't just allow anything, eh?
Sure, no, but that's the question we pose. So if we feel free speech, obviously it means any type of speech. So
no, I don't think so. I mean, like grooming, would grooming be free speech?
Then just in a way clarify position. So what forms of speech would you say needs to be punished by the law? And we're talking about sort of a moral issue, not say within context of the South African legal framework.
Yeah, not in context of South Africa at all. But I think grooming should be punished, definitely. I mean, wouldn't you punish that?
Grooming, just define that for me in your case.
Well, when like an old pedophile guy goes on Facebook and he pretends to be a young kid and he uses his fake young kid profile to sort of flirt with young 11-year-old girls, and then through that get their addresses, and then later abducts them to rape them or whatever. I mean, that part where he speaks to them in Facebook, that's what grooming is, and that should definitely not, for example, be allowed, even though it's just speech.
Yeah, you see
Sure,
that.
I get that. Go for it.
That's also an interesting angle because personally, I'm in agreement. That's degenerate. But the other aspect, and I've seen there are laws in the US, for instance, in California, they're trying to bring pedophilia as a sexual orientation rather than a sickness or an illegality. They're trying to change that. And what's interesting is in a case like grooming, it's not just the speech, it's also the act and intent. And I suppose one can argue, but Vicky Momberg also had intent to what? But I don't see that those guidelines or those lines where intent, for instance, Vicky Momberg's intent, she acted out of frustration, out of a very dire situation. She was just robbed. The cops are useless, so there's no lie there in the way that she spoke. And in that case, you can't base her intent on that one contextual instance. But I agree in the sense that yes, that grooming is absolute. That's deplorable. That should go because that speaks of a clear intent, and it's something that's methodical. It's something that's planned ahead. It's not just in the heat or spur of the moment, basically. And speaking of that frustration that people face or experience with South African services, with service delivery, you spoke of the Indian woman Alochna Moodley, who recently came under fire because she, in a private text to a friend, she mentioned the forbidden word in South Africa. And in that instance, it was a matter of someone looking over to her phone. So that's a breach of privacy. Then
yes.
people
I think that's also actually. Can I just mention the pedophilia that you started about? Because I mean, you started talking about one thing and we ended up somewhere totally different. So first off, the pedophilia thing, I want to respond to that. If you look at homosexuality, for example, 40 years ago, if we talk to our grandfathers and we mentioned that, it was seen as just as deplorable and just as degenerate as pedophilia is seen today. But through constant propaganda from the left, it has changed the minds of so many people that it is seen in the zeitgeist today as normal. And I think that's what the left is aiming for with pedophilia as well, to change the narrative as well. And maybe 20 years from now, pedophilia is seen as completely normal.
Yeah, and it's definitely something that we have to push back hard against. And the big issue with the Indian lady who basically sent an SMS is the fact that this will set a new precedent if anything comes of it, is the fact that, I mean, it's not even speech now, but the fact that it's just an SMS, meaning it's writing. And who knows? Your phone can be hacked. Obviously, it's quite difficult to hack someone's brain. So it's no, we're not going to have our vocal cords being taken over soon. But the fact that now, what about if someone hacks your phone and sends an SMS to someone, containing the word being spoken about? That will set a horrible precedent.
Ridiculous.
It's a massive problem, and hence that's why I think for me it's a very difficult moral question in a sense. Where do you find that line between when something is just thought, which obviously goes into speech, and when it crosses over action? And for me, sort of that defining that line where it results in action that obviously results in a violation of someone's human rights, or I should say natural rights, then that is where I feel immorality springs in. And again, this is being tested, especially in the time we are now.
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
Speaking of shifting perceptions, you mentioned how the left has changed what's acceptable, and also by default what's unacceptable to say and unacceptable to think. That's the phenomenon called the Overton window, right? Where what's acceptable discourse gets shifted either left or right depending on the political climate or the social climate.
Or the zeitgeist, as I think that's probably the best term to use there.
Yes. And in that sense, do you think there is a shift in the Overton window to the right lately, especially when looking at South African politics?
I think, of course, so. I think I'm doing I'm going through a lot of trouble to shift the Overton window myself. I'm playing on the right edges of the Overton window, and also with my contact with AfriForum and those people, I'm trying my best to pull them to the right as well. So that's happening here in South Africa. The Overton window is definitely shifting, and also, someone said to me, and they think that South Africa is basically 10 to 15 years behind the rest of the world. And I think the Western world, and when I say the Western world, I talk about mainly America, has reached peak liberalism in 2008. And from there, it's just a downward spiral for the liberals. They're losing so much ground because of their own stupidity that I think maybe in 10 or 20 years from now, we'll be back in the days of Teddy Roosevelt, for example, an age where men can be men again.
Yeah, it does seem like there's a sort of a cyclical nature to politics, especially, but also to what's socially acceptable. I mean, if you look at the Weimar Republic before Germany changed over to National Socialism and things like that, that was fairly. That was sort of like a modern day Sodom and Gomorrah type setup, So,
well, it was sort of what exactly we have in the Western world today, which is basically a modern day Sodom and Gomorrah.
So I think if hopefully if the trend picks up again, it shifts to what's natural and normal as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of Ernst Roots and AfriForum. Just today, the date of this recording, you had a live chat with him. And what's the reception been like on your interaction with Ernst Roots, with AfriForum? Has there been a lot of positive feedback, and what has there been any negative feedback at all?
I don't think there has been any negative feedback, no, but there has definitely been a lot of positive feedback. The relationship that I have with them now is basically that I can call them anytime and set up a meeting with any of their people, and they'll probably never say no to me. And I'll do the same from my side. I think there's a lot of mutual respect, and I think we understand each other, and we have a shared goal, which, of course, AfriForum is very cautious of what they say in public to stay in the Overton window, And but we know what our end goal is, both of us, and we share a very good same end goal. And actually, in the conversation I had with Ernst, we hinted towards that end goal, which is self-determination for every people. And basically, we're working towards that end goal, and I really believe we will, in the next few decades, achieve it.
What are steps that one can take towards self-determination? I know sometimes it's a bit vague, and for many people, it means different things. But if you look at something like the Urania movement and you see sort of where they are headed or what they're attempting to do and what they've managed to get done, what are other models for Afrikaners and for the Boer folk to be able to maintain self-determination or achieve it and then maintain it?
Well, in the first place, and Ernst has talked about this in length on the video, I think for the sake of this podcast, there's a lot of topics that you want me to cover, so I'll try summarize it as short as I can. But the problem that we've had with self-determination and all these people who are working towards it is that they are doing it in a stupid way. They're doing it in a way where they basically want to go to the government and negotiate and fight for self-determination, and that will never ever happen. You're not going to go to president of the country, Cyril Ramaphosa or Zuma before him, or Mbeki before him, or Moklante between Mbeki and Zuma, or Mandela or whoever, and tell them we want our own country, and they're going to laugh at you. So the only way that you are ever going to achieve it is like self-Tyrol done it, by basically taking over all of the functions of the state and have a parallel state, which AfriForum has achieved throughout the country, especially in the more rural areas, and later make it so that the state are basically worked out of the picture in that area, and then you just tell them basically to leave you alone, which happened in South Tyrol. And now we know that South Tyrol is almost completely self-determined. They pay 10% of their taxes. They tax money to the federal government, and they keep the other 90% of their tax money. So they are basically an independent country, which gives a few cents to the government. And I think in the next decade or so, we'll see South Tyrol either become independent or become part of Austria, like they once was. And that's basically the exact same strategy that we need here in South Africa.
No, I think we can only be so lucky if we can just pay 10% for the government to leave us alone. And I think you make a very good point. And, whenever everyone gets very depressed and negative about the situation in South Africa, I especially, I see a Boer Republic with a lot of deep anarchistic views. I think we see it as a big positive and sort of as a big opportunity in the fact that if you have a government that is so pathetic and so bad at service delivery, and almost every level, as you can see, every time something happens, if Eskom breaks down, we don't have electricity, we don't have water, it kind of brings back this idea of self-determination for everyone. What happens, everyone starts taking care of their own electricity, their own energy, their own water needs. Before you know it, everyone kind of gets this idea that they don't need service delivery anymore. And in that way, I see it as a big opportunity to kind of push people towards that. And we've done a podcast on practical ways that you can create this type of a parallel economy. And then we live in a beautiful time where we have something like cryptocurrencies, which is a mechanism in which we can create a parallel economy outside of the South African economy, with which you can kind of undermine sort of the government in that way. And when all seems to be crumbling, people won't understand why is there still people that seems to be thriving. And generally, it'll be those who's kind of become dependent on this parallel economy. And I would just like to obviously touch on some practical things, but what do you think about sort of the new cryptocurrency realm that we live in today?
Well, first, I think I have to respond to the parallel state that you are talking about. Have any of you guys ever heard of the term anarchist tyranny?
Sure, I've heard of tyranny. I've heard of anarchy. I don't see how that goes together, depending on your definition. Obviously, there's sort of a different definition peddled in mainstream media with regards to anarchy. Anarchy means there's no leaders or no rulers.
All right.
Tyranny,
let me tell you. Let me tell you what it means. What we are living here in South Africa is an anarchist tyranny. And the reason for that is because we are basically already living in anarchy. We're basically already paying for everything ourselves. We're basically there is no government already in any of the aspects of our lives. We send our kids to private schools. We go to private hospitals. We pay private security to protect us. Everything's becoming private. Most people are installing solar panels or petrol generators for power and so forth. And it's become like that the state is basically insignificant. We can cut them out of our lives any day and we will thrive. We don't need them for any of those service deliveries anymore, but we still have this tyrant on our backs. We basically live in an anarchy, but we have to give 70% of our income to this thief. And that is what anarchist tyranny is, and that is what we live in.
Sure, no, I hear that, but I would like to disagree with that. I mean, you can't put those terms together. If you want to live in complete anarchy, that means there is no rulers basically defining the rules you have in your own life. The fact that you are taxed, the fact that the currency that we use today that is defended by their laws, the fact that is imposed upon you kind of makes it impossible to call it an anarchistic state. I mean, if you just look at your life personally, the fact that you have to pay VAT means
I understand.
You're not living in 100%. You're not living in 100% anarchistic. Obviously, I agree with you. We live in a high level of anarchy. I mean, I can choose what I want to do tonight. I can choose what movie. I can choose who I want to marry, who I want to be with. I was trying and
think you
educate people to
misunderstand
this.
me. I think we misunderstand what anarchist tyranny means. You want to look at anarchy as what anarchy would be when it's on its own. But what anarchist tyranny is, that the people are basically living in a state of anarchy on their own while they have a tyrant. But if it's just a tyranny, then the tyrant produces the municipal and the services that the government usually would, but the tyrant's not even doing that. The tyrant's just taking your money while you do all those services for yourself, and that is what the term anarchist tyranny means. I know exactly what anarchy means. I am very close to an anarchist myself, and hopefully we'll talk a little bit more about this in the podcast as well. But that's basically the definition of the anarchist tyranny. It's just it's not really an opinion. It's just a definition that has been put to this term.
No, sure, I get that. I don't think we want to get bogged down in semantics. I just do think I like to push back against when people put two words together that are basically oxymoron in itself. I don't think there's a lot of value in exploring a term like that if it's much easier just to separate the terms. But we'll definitely get to anarchy later in this podcast.
Speaking of ruling systems and ways in which we can perhaps govern ourselves, you've previously mentioned in some of your shows, you've been quite vocal about your leanings politically. And you've previously mentioned that you've sort of are more towards the libertarian side of things. Perhaps you could just elaborate on some of your political leanings. And also, I think now is a good time as any, maybe just also go into what you would like, perhaps see in the country in terms of where good anarchy can go.
Well, my leanings towards anarchy is basically that I'm very, very close to an anarcho-capitalist. I am a paleo-libertarian. So what that means is I think the state's involvement should be as minimal as possible. I don't believe that full anarchy can ever exist because there's always going to have to be some way of protection for the people. I know that Benjamin Franklin once said that anyone who wants to give up a little bit of freedom for a little bit of security deserves neither and will lose both. But of course, you in a total anarchy, you can't leave your house because you have to protect it all the time, because anyone can just come and take all your stuff and walk away with it. That's why I believe in paleo-libertarianism, which says that the citizens should have protection by the state, which is a force like a police force or an army, or both in one. The citizens needs protection from people on the outside and from each other in the country, which the first would be the army and the second would be the police that protects them. But it can also be one force that protects them from both. But that's all I think the state should ever do. I think all the municipalities and like sewage and all of that can be done privately. I mean, most towns in South Africa, over 60% of towns have already privatized their sewage, and which is a bit of a joke if you don't live in South Africa and experience it. But they're already doing it on their own, and everything else, private schools, private healthcare, everything is already in place. So it will be quite an easy transition for us to switch over to paleo-libertarianism in South Africa.
No, I just want to get a comment on that. According to me, that it basically sits very close to the term minarchism. Am I correct that is there a difference between minarchism and paleo-libertarianism?
Not a very significant one, no. Minarchism is basically, as I said about paleo-libertarianism, it's just minimal government, just the absolute minimum of government needed to live in a society that's actually safe enough for anyone to live in.
Many international listeners might not truly grasp is that we have terrible service delivery in this country. We've got services, municipalities, utilities are rubbish in this country. And one of the big things that has come into recent news and even perhaps more so for the last 2 years on and off, is the failing issues of electricity. Just having power in your house is a huge issue. Sometimes the power goes out, then what do you do? Also, water. So those two basic utilities that we battle with here in South Africa, that's already caused us to be able to become independent in certain ways. Like you say, many people build their own, or they supply themselves with solar panels. They are finding ways of recycling water, of having tanks that catch rain, things like that sort of gets them off the grid. What are other ways in which we can sort of improve our independence from government utilities, government services, things like that?
Well, the most important one is protection, and that lies in private security and also in organizing in militias. I think it's very, very important for anyone here in South Africa to become part of some sort of a militia, or a buurtwag, which is the better, more acceptable term that we use here in South Africa, which is actually just a very mild term for militia. But I think it's really important from your side to give back to the community, and that is how the most important way, I think, to give back to the community is to become part of such a buurtwag. And also it's very positive for yourself to get trained to use your firearm and to be able to defend yourself in a situation where you are going to have to do that, especially in a country like South Africa, which the likelihood of that situation is very high to happen.
I think you made a comment about, in your sort of paleo-libertarian view, that the function of the police and the military still has to be state governed. And as you talked about, that we basically live in a state of anarchy, and I genuinely agree. We're very close to that. And another interesting fact is that private security outnumber, I think our police officers is about 5 to 1, and that we, in comparison to the rest of the world, we as a country have the highest ratio when it comes to private security as compared to the government employed police force.
Yeah,
and
we also have the highest number of private security guards per capita here.
Yes, exactly. So sure, every time you park your car, there's another private security that pops up. And I mean, in that view, in the fact that if you take that stat, it almost seems like we're already living in that you can add to the sort of police anarchy, that we are outsourcing our protection as well. And I just kind of bring that up as maybe sort of a rebuttal to your argument that you can't go full anarchist because you still need to outsource these type of protections to the state, wherein we've actually already privatized that. And I mean, in a small community, privatizing your security is definitely possible, and that's basically what we're doing. Anyway, I just want to hear your thoughts on that.
All right, let me just elaborate on that. The reason why you can't rely solely on private security is this. If you live in a libertarian or a Republican state where there's still a rule of law, what is going to enforce that law? And you can't say private security because that's completely unrealistic. And the reason for that is because if you rely solely on private security, everyone that hires private security guards basically has their own army, and whoever has the biggest army makes the rules, and that's how there's no republic then, because people can then just start fighting amongst each other and using their own little private armies to kill each other and take each other's stuff. And then you basically live in the Middle Ages again, where you have kings of cities, and every city has their own king or their own duke or their own marquis or whatever, and then they're just fighting amongst each other all the time, and there's no progress because everything's just war all the time. And that is why you do need a centralized police force or army to enforce a centralized law. Otherwise, as I said, total anarchy is not fun, because it's just basically one massive war between small factions all the time.
Sure, and I'll rebut that by saying it sounds to me what you're saying is, we don't want small armies, which I don't think a security force is not an army. You can only create an army with with tax money. So that's why having a big government always is a problem. So you in a way
I mean, of course, you can create an army with private money as well.
No, sure, but let's just in the sense that if you compare that a private army is a bad thing, and we should not move towards maybe someone starting a private army. So the better idea is to create a much bigger army, which the state usually creates. And as we see empirically throughout governments, throughout history, whenever government starts, whether it's a very small government, it generally ends up, it just grows and grows, and that ends up in a big state, which with a big army, and then we have wars. Generally, if you look back at the First World War, the Second World War, none of that could have started without a state taking out so much money. Obviously, we live in a different time today where there is things like Blackwater. People can start armies like, again, even Blackwater was kind of subsidized a lot by the government as well. And the state of America was already set up, which obviously goes to other countries and does their imperial wars. So I think empirically looking at history, it's a difficult argument to say that we want to take away the risk of small private armies, and we're going to replace that rather with a big army.
I agree with what you say. If the whole world was one massive anarchy, then that might have made sense. But if you're going to create an anarchy in just one little country like South Africa, and everyone just have their own little small private armies, then it's very easy for anyone. I mean, freaking even Madagascar can then just send their army in and come destroy everything, because the people won't be united, because the people will be fighting amongst each other like in the Dark Ages. So Zimbabwe or Madagascar or Botswana or Namibia or even Angola or Zambia or whoever can just send their own army in, which will be a lot bigger than any other person's private army, and then just wipe you completely off the face of the earth. And that's why you really need a strong army. That's why conservatives throughout the world always lobby for a big army, because otherwise it's very easy for any other country to come in and swipe you off the floor with you.
Sure, and I'll counter that with the argument that generally when people go over to another population, say Madagascar wants to come over here and wage war against us, war is generally played in an economical field. So if you go to a population and you can't exploit them in a way, you won't really start a war if you can't take over that population and then tax them and then use them for economical purposes. Hence, I think, going with the argument that humans are generally so evil that they will always want to take over other populations or other tribes, and that is sort of the inherent state of evilness of humanity. I think that is actually an argument against a monarchistic state, because in essence, if you use the argument that generally more than 50% of people are evil and that they would do that if handed the power, well, then creating a state is a very, very bad idea. And if you say less than 50% of people are evil, then you generally also don't want to create a state, because what their incentive to then rise to the top of a state and create an army is so much more, and you want to decrease that incentive. So, both sides of that argument, whether you say humanity is inherently evil, less or more than 50%, I think there's still no argument for the state.
Yeah, I hear what you say. It looks like you listened a lot too much of Stefan Molyneux's old videos, and I can say that because I have. But in any case, I think anyone who believes that humanity is not inherently evil is really naive, and he hasn't had much experience with the world yet. I mean, I don't know if you guys are religious or not, but even if you read the Bible, the Bible tells you that humanity is inherently evil. And that's just the facts that you can see just right there out in the world throughout history. Humanity is not good. And if you're naming this 50% figure, which is quite funny, because I think it's quite closer to 100% of people are inherently evil.
Sure. So if we go, I mean, I disagree with the fact that humans are inherently evil. humans go according to incentive and biological law. So let's say that if you believe in the Bible,
yeah, but I mean, biological law and incentive is predatory, and predatory will translate to what we believe as being evil in the modern world.
Sure, of course not. Why do you say it's predatory? The human brain has evolved basically as the greatest cooperative organ known in the history of mankind, which is not, it's predatory, yes, because we're at the top of the food chain, but it's sort of height of achievement is the fact that it can cooperate, which is not predatory. And if you let's just look at that fact. If you say everyone is evil, and we look at statistics over the last 100 years, where crime and murder or levels of murder has gone down. If you look at all stats of crime across the world,
of course, not in South Africa.
Yeah, sure, but you're talking about all humans. No, obviously, it's not just there's humans outside of South Africa. So inherently, if you look statistically, I think that goes against your argument that humans are inherently evil. And as I said, if you believe in the Bible and that the wages of sin, which comes from inherent evilness, is death, then why are we 7 billion people? There's not a lot of death there. Sure, there's a lot of people that have died, but the fact that we're still around, I don't see how you can make that argument that humans are inherently evil.
Well, I dispute that fact that you say that crime worldwide has gone down over the last, I don't know how many years you have said.
100 years since the record.
Okay, 100 years
since recording. Sure, yeah.
Okay, I just pulled up the statistics here. The site that I got the statistics here on is called data.worldbank.organization, and it shows that a very steep increase over the last 100 years in murder rate. Well, this is now the World Bank's site. It's just the first site that pops up when I
Sure.
Googled the tendency of the international murder rate, and excluding for wars, which was the Second and the First World War, and all of those wars happening, murder rate as in murder has actually increased. And I can tell you the reason for that as well, and that is because of all the failed communist states in the third world that has basically caused those countries to become bloodbaths. If you just look at countries like Venezuela and Honduras and basically all of Southern America, and you look at Africa and all these places, all of them are basically failed communist states where the murder rate have exploded over the last 40 years or so. And of course, all of these places, population still picks up a lot. And the reason for that is you are going to need a very, very high murder rate to surpass birth rate. I mean, if you look at South Africa, which has been one of the highest murder rates in the world, of course, but in any case, we want to birth rate with our murder rate. Our murder rate is 167 for the cat. So it's common to think that we were out faster than we could.
I pulled the BrennanCenter.org, and it says crime trends from 1990 to 2016, and crime rates have dropped dramatically and remain near historic lows for the last quarter century. And this is, like I said, from the BrennanCenter.org. Again, so they chose differently that there is a decrease in crime, meaning the evilness of humanity is decreasing. And again, I'm sure we can kind of keep pulling up information.
I'm sure about that. But
the
main difference between your and my information is my information was just focused on murder, and it seems like yours are just like crime.
Sure, crime is evil as well.
So what is crime then? That's too wide of a definition to actually, I would say, ever pull up a statistic of.
Sure, here it is. It's violent crime, and then they go into it and they'll define it, and then there's murder. And
murder is, of course, murder and homicide is, of course, the only crime that actually decreases a population. And the main argument before we even started pulling up information was just about population and how the population would have decreased if there was really evil people, or if people of this world was really inherently evil.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, here it says murder. It's from 1991 to 2016. The murder rate fell by roughly half, from 9.8 killings to 5.3. So my argument was in the fact that if humankind was purely 100% evil, surely it would have killed itself off. So according to the biblical interpretation of what is the wages of evil, which I can equate to sin, and again, there you can tell me I might be wrong there. I'm not too sharp on my biblical knowledge. I have read through it a few times, but I might stand under correction. Yeah. So, and then for the fact that from the statistics in at least the last 25 years, evil acts such as murder and violent crime has decreased in all cities that has done these statistics. So hence, that is my argument.
In terms of a local context, South Africa has a huge murder rate. The crime in South Africa is quite high. It's one of the top rape capitals of the world. It's one of the worst murder rates in the world. And I think just to sort of delve into that angle, part of your work on Twitter, part of your work thus far has been raising awareness of farm murders and of the murder rates in South Africa. Perhaps you could also just elaborate a bit more on that and just to give us an idea of the severity of that situation in South Africa.
All right, let me pull up my statistics here. I think that's probably one of the biggest problems we face here in South Africa, and by we, I mean white people, and especially Afrikaners or Boers face here in South Africa, then it is definitely farm murders. And I don't buy into that argument that you're supposed to, or it's immoral to care about your own, or to care more about your own than you do about everyone else, by saying that you should focus on combating farm murders, or not focus on that. You should focus on combating all murders, because that is the most ridiculous argument ever, because then you would be saying, you can't focus on saving rhinos because you have to focus on all animals, and all animals are being poached in South Africa, but it's about the rate and about the severity, and also about how important farmers are to our community, because I mean, no farmer, no food, and everyone needs food to survive. That's one of the basic things that you need to survive. And that is why farm murders is really a massive problem here in South Africa.
Recently, we did an investigative video on the monument at Nampo, the Wall of Remembrance. And
I saw that.
Part of that research that we did was talking with the organizers, the head of the Boer Henneman Farmers Association, and one of the key facts that everyone involved with that monument and with who work with the names and with making sure that the work is accurate in terms of the victims of farm murders, one of the prevailing opinions and facts that they would bring up was the fact that if there is no farmers that produce towards the agriculture of South Africa and in turn the economy of South Africa, then the rest of the country falls into disrepair. If you could just give us sort of an idea of, in regards to the severity of farm murders in South Africa, the fact that farmers are basically the lifeblood of this country, how bad do you think the effects would be if South Africa was to turn into a situation like Zimbabwe, where farmers were systematically murdered, where farmers were sent out of the country, where the GDP and the economy of the country, influenced by agriculture, was so influenced that the country, I mean, you've got $100 billion Zim note, So what sort of effects would we see in South Africa if the rate of farm murders continued?
Well, I think if the rate of farm murders continued, then we basically we're done in this country, because agriculture only forms a very small part of our GDP, but the importance of agriculture is unparalleled by any other industry in South Africa. Let's say, for instance, heavy industries like steel mills and stuff like that. Imagine for a second we lose all of them in South Africa. What would happen? It wouldn't make us a very significant difference in our economy. I think most of our heavy industries has gone under in any case in the last 30 or so years. But if let's say we take agriculture completely out of the picture in South Africa and our agriculture stop producing at all, we will have exactly the same that is happening in in Zimbabwe. We will have famine because it's literally impossible for us to import that amount of food and to make it accessible and affordable to the population, and that's why a lot of people will die if that happens.
And what are ways in which, and to maybe give an idea to the international audience, this is one issue that I think many, not only civilians in South Africa have to deal with, but also farmers, is the issue of gun laws. And the Second Amendment in America and the First Amendment are parts of the Constitution that really help the population not to be completely undermined, and especially the Second Amendment. And we don't have something like that in South Africa. Perhaps you could just sort of give an idea and stated an interest in this side of what defense entails, just for the international audience. And I think many South African listeners might be very interested in knowing more about what our gun laws entail. And if you could just sort of elaborate on the aspects, the difficulties involved in obtaining firearms license, in even obtaining a firearm.
Yeah, well, we've actually quite a few organizations in South Africa has fought for better gun laws and better accessibility of guns to people. For example, the South African Hunters Union and also the South African Sports Shoot Union, and all of these fights, they were not very successful. They lost most of their court cases, and the court has basically ruled that all these old people that had old guns that the licenses had expired of need to go hand them in or face prosecution. And that's about 400,000 gun owners in South Africa, of which I would say an educated guess is more than 95% of them are white. So we can see that as an attack on our freedom, and it's not getting better for us. Gun control is a bureaucratic nightmare here in South Africa, and it's very, very difficult to get a gun, to go through the whole licensing process. It takes months. It costs a lot of money. You have to do all these courses. All these courses cost money, and just on a money-wise, I believe that it costs more money to get the training and the licensing and everything in place than it actually costs to buy a middle-class CZ pistol or whatever you want to buy.
So you'd say that bureaucratically, government-wise, there is an agenda behind firearms and self-defense in South Africa then?
I'm not going to say that there is an agenda from the state side. I don't want to go into all these conspiracy theories, but it certainly looks that way, and that's about how far I would go. I'm not going to go further in saying anything.
And if also just maybe to touch on that issue in terms of gun control, I think what I've seen also is that there's many instances where you see news reports of cash in transit heists, and you see farm murders occur and things like that. You see police firearms being used in robberies, in farm murders and things like that. Obviously, then there seems to be some sort of corruption within our government system. Could you perhaps comment a bit on the situation regarding the level of corruption within government? And it could even be related to the political rhetoric we hear in the news every day.
Well, I think that is very, very dangerous, the fact that the police wants to come take our guns. And I think it's also very dangerous, the fact that the police so-called lose all these firearms. I'm not going to comment about these firearms, that police firearms being used in farm attacks, for the simple reason that I do not have the knowledge or the stats in front of me of this happening, or the proof of that happening here in front of me. But of course, it's a possibility. But I do know that the police lose, if it's the right word to use, many thousands of firearms every year. Whether that is individuals' firearms that are being handed in, or if that's actually service weapons, I wouldn't know. But not just for farm murders, for any criminals in this country, that is a massive problem for us, that any criminals in this country end up with all these guns in their hands.
Yeah, and recently just for international viewers as well, in the last few months, we've actually had occasions where the police stations themselves have been attacked, and obviously the police at the police station were overpowered, tied, and then they basically committed armed robbery within the police station. So we're at a stage where in certain places, even the police can't keep themselves safe, which obviously is very ominous for the citizens.
Yeah, of course. And I've actually seen a newspaper article that said the police are being robbed of their guns at knife points. I'm pretty sure it's fake or it's satire or whatever, but
still funny enough, though.
It's still funny enough, and it's still possible enough that it could have been true here in South Africa.
Sorry, that's the one thing that international listeners and the international media doesn't understand is it can sound as preposterous as you might think, but there's a reality to some of the stuff that gets said here, and it's the same thing. For instance, now you say a policeman. It sounds satirical that a policeman with a firearm could get robbed at knife point, but that sort of complacency and ineptitude happens a lot here in South Africa. And I think also in regards to ineptitude and complacency, in South Africa we've got a very communist, Marxist form of political governance. The one thing that is very interesting to see as a meme across the internet is that true communism has never been tried, and in South Africa's case, I think communism has been tried, and it's a failure, not necessarily as communistic as what Russia would have been back in the day, or the Soviet Union. But just to elaborate on, would you say that South Africa is a failed communist state? And that being said, if we look at third world countries that apply communist principles and how they inevitably fail, is there then a correlation with race and IQ?
Well, in the first place, you're asking, is South Africa a failed communist state? So I'll answer to that. I think we haven't seen the first of it yet. I think we are going to see a lot more of it in the near future, and that is a big problem for us, because the more that communism fails here in South Africa, or the more that communist policies fail here in South Africa, the more communism we see here in South Africa. The more the communist policies that there already are failing, the more communist policies are being introduced, and that's inevitably in any country. It doesn't really matter if it's Africa or Europe or South America, or wherever you have these communist or socialist countries, they all inevitably fail. Even Sweden. Sweden is a very socialist state, and Sweden is falling. They are trying to pretend like everything's good there in Sweden, but I've actually got a good friend from Sweden. His name is Jonas Nilsson, and he actually made a brilliant documentary on the Boers and the farmers in South Africa. You can see it on YouTube. It's called the Boer Project. But in any case, so what he said and what I've seen about Sweden is that they are actually falling into crime. The second highest rape rate in the world. They've got a very high murder rate, and that's a big problem. And the economy is also failing, and the murder and the rape rate you can attribute to the shift in demographics. I think it's quite safe to attribute it. It's very, very politically incorrect to do that, but it's safe to do that because the statistics will support that. But the economy is failing because of the communist or the socialist policies. In any case, that's what I have to say about that. But About race and IQ, Adams and I actually had a lengthy discussion on this, but my view on that is, yes, there are differences between races and their IQs, and it's undeniable. You'll be stupid if you try to deny it. But I don't think that IQ is the main drive for success in a country or in a group or in an individual, for that matter. I think culture is playing a much bigger role in that. And a very easy way to debunk that is because, okay, of course, Africa basically fails. Every single African country fails. It will be a lie to try to say that there's any successful African countries. But if you look at, if you compare the Asian countries to the European countries, and you compare Asian individuals to European individuals, then that's where you see that IQ is not that important, because Asian countries have much higher average IQs than European countries do have. But still, European countries historically and currently perform better than Asian countries. And also, if you look at individuals, let's look at, for example, the Fields Medal or the Nobel Prize for Science, or any of these hyper-achieving individual achievements that has much to do with your intelligence and your work rate and everything. It's 90% European males that win these prizes. And I think that is mostly culture that you can ascribe to their success.
I think that is very accurate, in the sense that it takes more than IQ really to determine success, both for a nation and for an individual. And you could just take the example of something like North Korea has got, obviously, they're still from the same genetic material as South Koreans, and South Koreans have got a high average IQ, and you could just see the state of North Korea. And in a sense there, I feel it is, obviously they live under complete tyranny, and it's basically an open concentration camp. In a sense, I feel that, it does need a pretty free society, and, as you say, culture, and then an amount of IQ to really provide success for a nation. So again, in like North Korea, it's the political system that suppresses success, and then IQ does not really play a role. So if you would say culture, could you maybe expand, in a sense, what would you say, what parts of, say, then African culture really is the sort of the cause of the lack of success that we see in African countries, if not IQ, if IQ is not seen as the main driver?
I'm talking about the culture of the Africans, that I think is a very big contributor to the fact that African communities fail in general and as a group, and why there's such inequality between whites and blacks in South Africa. That can be mainly ascribed to their culture, is the fact that there is a very, very big problem in African culture in general in the way their kids are being raised. More than 90% of the kids are being raised with just one parent looking after them, or one parent or less looking after them. A very large portion of them have no parents looking after them. They live with their older sister or their grandma or whatever. Their grandma usually is too old to really look after them, and their older sister usually is too young to give them any significant upbringing. So that's one big problem. The other big problem we have there is nutrition. Now, that's not really cultural, but the fact that nutrition is really bad in these African communities, especially the poorer ones, that contributes to, of course, lower performance in academic or any field, basically, for the children compete in. Then another factor that we have is this whole thug culture, in which rap music and gangster rap is being seen as this perfect dream for any of these African or black children. I know this is more of an African American problem, but it would be naive to say that it's not a problem here in South Africa as well. I've seen it with my own eyes, how they idolize these rappers and how they all also want to become gangsters and, kill people and fuck bitches or whatever. That's basically the what these rappers say you should do. In any case, that's the culture they have. And then in another big problem is the fact that they hit their kids, and by that I don't mean like giving a kid a hiding for being naughty on the butt, which is very prevalent in Afrikaner culture, because that's not really damaging them in any way. But if you look at the way Africans hit their children, they would just, take a stick and hit them over the head repeatedly, which can lead to very bad long-term effects for those children. Yeah, just the culture of this victim mentality is also a massive problem in the African communities, and the fact that they are constantly being propagated and told that the whites owe them something and they are entitled to the wealth that the whites have, supposedly. And they then develop this culture where they think that they should not work for anything because the whites stole everything and the whites have everything, and they're going to take back what the whites have, and they're going to take back the land and take back the wealth and take back the money or whatever, because according to all the propaganda, the whites took everything that belongs to the Africans and they're going to take it back. And that also, of course, causes massive problems for the Africans in their communities, because that contributes to the fact that they are not being successful in any of the fields of life as a group, as on average. I'm not talking about individuals. Of course, you'll get very, very smart individuals in any community, and you'll get very high achieving individuals in any community. But I'm talking about the average and the group average, and that is very low for them. And to say it's apartheid's fault is a fallacy, because it just doesn't hold any water,
Yeah, I think we couldn't summarize it any better. And just, it was Father's Day recently, and a stat came out that, in a census about 2016, all births that were registered, it showed that about 62% didn't know who their fathers was, which is an absolute shocking statistic. And it basically falls in place with what you said, that it's a continual generation of fatherlessness. And just from studies, we know how important it is for a child to become a functioning adult to have a two-parent household, and especially a father in the house to provide a role model for adulthood. And that is something that is desperately needed in the Black community.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we can really do a whole video or a whole podcast on this.
Maybe just to conclude, for the Afrikaner and the Boer, what are some positive aspects that we can look forward to? I know we've talked about many issues that the country faces, lots of what would be considered black pills. What are some positives about the future for Afrikaners, for Boers, that we can look forward to? You've previously mentioned that self-determination is possible. Perhaps you could just elaborate a bit more on that as a positive end note.
Well, if you want me to provide a positive end note, I think most of these things that you named that can be seen as black pills, for example, Malema and the EFF and all these things, are basically the best things that could have happened to us here in South Africa. Because let's look at farm murders, for example. It has been going on since the 90s. And we've been fighting it, but we've been fighting a losing battle. But the fact that Malema went out and said, that we have such a big figure telling us, we're going to kill the Boer, and then when he says it, people like Andile Lingisa of the ANC says the same thing and say we're going to take the land by force, and Cyril Ramaphosa says we're going to expropriate land without compensation, and all these things happen. That's the best thing that could have happened to us, because at least now we are being honest with each other, and we know where we stand, and from here we can move forward, and the world sees what's happening here, and we can fight back against something that's actually been declared. We can fight back against a war that has been declared, basically. And we are not being seen as the people who are racist and who are trying to oppress these blacks anymore, because the truth is coming out. And the truth is basically what we see here in South Africa, which is the most positive thing, because now that the truth is coming out of the situation, from here, we can really start building South Africa, the whole Rainbow Nation, of Mandela has been built on a massive lie. And I think we all can agree. We can all agree on that. And yeah, that's basically all I need to say. I think the fact that we can now build from the truth here is the most positive thing that could have happened.
Thanks again for being on the show with us, Willem. Any listeners that might want to follow your work, support your work, if you could just please give out your social media links, where they can find you, and do you have any plans for the future?
All right. Just quickly, you can follow me on YouTube on my channel. It's just Willem Petzer, spelled WILLEMP, and then my surname PETZER. Twitter, you can follow me there. My handle is just at WILLEMPET. And you can look at my stuff from there. And also, yeah, I do have a lot of plans to grow my channel and grow other people's channels as well, and start producing more alternative media here in South Africa. But if you follow me on my channel, you'll see a lot more about that, and I'm very positive about it. But I'm not going to say too much about it now.
No problem. Great. Thanks for taking the time to be with us on the show. We look forward to more collaboration in the future, and we look forward to seeing more of what you produce and what you achieve for the Afrikaner, for the Boer, and for white South Africans in general.
All right. Thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate that.
No problem. Thanks. Thank you for tuning in and listening to another Boer Republic podcast. Please find us on Twitter, on Gab, on minds.com. We are also on YouTube, where you'll most likely find this podcast, as well as on DTube, on PewTube, as well as BitChute. We're trying to move into as much alternative platforms as possible, and your support makes that possible for more regular updates. If you enjoy the content, if you are keen on finding out how you can help us get more out, we have a few cryptocurrency addresses in the description. Please consider donating.
Great stuff. And we would love you guys to support this. We can give you all the great stuff that you want to know about South Africa and the way that it's going to collapse.
If this message resonates, please share it with who might find it interesting, and stay safe wherever you might find yourself.